Welcome everyone to another episode of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. As always, we're here to keep you up to date with the latest news, tech, content and wisdom from the world of marketing. And as always, my co-host is a man on a mission to demystify digital marketing. He's the host of the Content Marketing Studio video podcast. Please welcome Mr. Pascal Fintoni.
Well, thank you very much. Another week, another podcast episode with my good friend Roger Edwards, the voice of the Marketing and Finance podcast and the host of the Rock Video series. Thank you so much once again for being the host today.
And this is episode 42. And for the geeks who are listening to this show, and let's face it, we're all geeks who are listening to this show, the number 42 will be significant. And that will probably be enough of a clue to give away what we're going to be talking about later in film marketing. So we've got a long way to go before we get to film marketing. So let's get straight on with the show and go straight into the news.
And we start with Amazon, Roger, who will create more than 10,000 jobs in the UK by the end of 2021. The e-commerce giant plans to create a parcel centre and 4 new houses, increasing its workforce to 55,000.
Ryanair has reported a loss of €815 million as the airline was decimated by the coronavirus epidemic.
Electrical company Dixon Carphone is merging its 4 tech and retail businesses, 𝗪𝗂𝗄𝗎 World, Dixon's, Carphone Warehouse and the service partner Team Know-How will all become known as Currys by the end of October 2021.
Airbnb hails early results from the shift to brand building over performance marketing. The travel accommodation business cut sales and marketing spend by 28% to $229 million over the first quarter of 2021.
Well, while YouTube is launching a $100 million fund to attract creators to its Shorts video feature that rivals TikTok. No need to apply, Roger. YouTube will be in touch with you directly based on engagement and views.
Dove, the personal care brand marketed by Unilever, partnered with TikTok to amplify a no digital distortion body positive campaign on the video sharing app.
A study of 500 leaders of small to medium-sized enterprises found that 42% have no idea how to create an online profile, despite the fact that it could really positively impact promotion of their business.
And Delta Airlines just made a bold new decision. COVID vaccine mandatory for new start employees, but not for existing staff. So Pascal, I'm going to go straight into the YouTube and TikTok references. Even though we've done YouTube Shorts and TikToks a little bit in the show recently, I just thought it would be worth noticing. Now, up until now, these YouTube Shorts, the very short videos, haven't been monetized. So if you're lucky enough to be on the YouTube monetization program and you're putting up shorts, then you don't get any commission for any adverts that are shown during those. However, they've just launched this $100 million fund, which they're going to fire at people who distribute YouTube Shorts. Now that sounds like a hell of a lot of money, but I guess when you consider how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions and billions of videos are being put up every day, it probably isn't that much, and it is actually half the amount that TikTok are giving to their creators. And I've noticed quite a bit of grumpy feedback on YouTube itself from creators who are saying what YouTube will just do is they'll fire this at the big stars like Logan Paul and PewDiePie and people like that, and they'll just make even more money. Whereas, you know, smaller YouTubers with smaller channels and less subscribers will still be fighting to get the recognition. So, I mean, it sounds good, and you know, it will hopefully put some money in some people's pockets, but it might also as well increase the number of adverts that we have to suffer on YouTube.
Well, I think the criticism that you've just shared from the let's call them smaller creators is probably merited, because the official press release from YouTube simply says, based on engagement and views, we'll be in touch with you and offer you financial support. So if someone is doing well already, are they going to be excluded, or are they going to automatically be included, and then you into that kind of the rich are getting richer and the poor stay poorer?
We'll have to see, I guess, won't we? I mean, I've experimented with these YouTube shorts, and I haven't seen any bigger or less engagement using that format than the normal videos I put up. But I'm not the ideal candidate to be a research study, I'm sure. I also wanted to talk about, and again, TikTok's mentioned in this, is Dove. You know, the brand who are they do soaps, they do body lotions, and they've come under quite a lot of respect over the years for not always showing, you know, bikini models and supposedly perfectly slim or perfectly muscly people. You know, they go for everyday, ordinary shapes like you and I, and they've got a lot of kudos for that. So I can absolutely see how they are teaming up with TikTok to try to overcome this perception that a lot of people have that you absolutely have to look body perfect on camera. But there's a slight sort of contradiction in my head, because all of these video apps like TikTok, like the Shorts thing, and Reels on Instagram have all these filters that allow you to, you know, make your face look less wrinkly or make your face look more tanned. So on the one hand, they're saying, don't worry about your body. But then on the other hand, they're giving you these tools to sort of spruce it up a bit.
And then add on to that, the content that you see on TikTok, frankly, you know, is really not in line with the campaign. So I wish them well. And in fairness to TikTok, they do partner up with good brands. I mean, I received their business newsletter, e-newsletter, and they announce, you know, the different partnerships around the world. And it seems always a very wise choice. And you hear more of the kind of partnership from a brand like TikTok than any others, I must say.
Yeah, absolutely. They do seem to be trying to treat people right. We've mentioned Ryanair a few times on the show. Famously, I was kidnapped by Ryanair many, many years ago, so I boycotted them for 10 years. Obviously, they've made, like all the airlines, a massive, massive loss. Now, as we record this today, Pascal, it's the 19th of May, and our travel restrictions in the UK have been lifted to a certain extent over the last couple of days, so people can travel abroad, and I've already seen Ryanair firing out the £5 fares to Portugal and the £5 fares to Spain and wherever else in Europe. And you know, it's a hell of a big loss to be then going out there trying to sell £5 fares to people.
It's a tricky one. I mean, Ryanair has always made the headlines for all the right and wrong reasons, as we know, particularly because of their leader. They have contributed to the success of the tourism industry by opening up new destinations and new airports. We used to call them secondary or tertiary airports. So I think, you know, the UK public has enjoyed traveling with Ryanair. And is it a case, Roger, that nothing lasts forever and Ryanair will have to bring their prices in line with other airlines?
I think it's either going to be that, or the route network is going to be significantly changed once the new normal comes into being. But I mean, who knows? We hear talk of Indian variants and this, that, and the other, and some doom-mongers are saying we'll be back in lockdown in a few months, which wouldn't be good news for people who want to travel. So much of this is a watching brief now, isn't it?
Oh, completely.
Because the future is so completely unknown. The last one I wanted to draw our attention to this week is the one where a study of 500 leaders of small to medium-sized companies found that 42% had no idea how to create an online profile. Actually, even though this article I was directed to by an article in the Sun newspaper, which I have to say isn't exactly my favourite rag, but the study that's behind it I think is legit, so that's why I left it in. If you actually dig deeper, it's more like 50% of businesses just have no idea how to do marketing. And it just reinforces a lot of the things that we say on this show all the time, that, you know, marketing isn't just about doing some advertising or putting some content up or doing some Facebook ads. It's about that whole working out who your customer is and delivering an offer And I think that this particular study just reinforces to me that, what you and I do, Pascal, which is to help people understand marketing, it is still massively important in the current environment.
And when I saw the news, I was shocked. I thought that figure is very high. But I realized it wasn't shock, it was disappointment, because I just realized that people are really missing out on, but they are also, I guess, the victim of self-doubt. And,
Yes.
not knowing what to say or what to do. They're probably also the victim of misinformation. So there's a lot of ways in which you could try and inform yourself. I will touch on that in a moment. But, if you try to educate yourself about how to create an online profile, you'll be just overwhelmed with the amount of articles, videos, and podcasts telling you what to do. And I think what people need is just, very simple advice that works in a language that they can relate to. So I think for me, the 42% say they have no idea. I think what they're saying is we don't have the confidence of doing it ourselves, or we don't have the confidence about the information that we can access freely because, hey, what do we know? And I think for me, it's disappointment more than shock thinking about it.
Yeah, it could even be that it's 42% of them just don't know where to start because there is so much stuff out there. And hopefully, Pascal, that means that there's massive amounts of opportunities for you and I to help those 42%.
Super. Just very quickly before we move on to the next segment, Roger, your reaction to Dixon's. So 4 different brands. To be honest with you, I was kind of happy with it. I didn't think there was confusion in the marketplace, but now it's going to become known as Currys. Is that going to work for them? Because they are different services, different audiences, and different products.
Yeah, I mean, what wasn't clear from the news article is whether Currys is going to be like the umbrella brand, but they may still have some sub-brand versions of it. I suspect it isn't that. It's all going to be Currys, in which case they've got quite a big communications job to do, because Currys PC World is quite a lot different to Carphone Warehouse. And those big names, if they all disappear into Currys, it might confuse a lot of people. The thing that struck me was this incredibly sort of garish purple colour that is now going to be their colour and their corporate brand. I mean, it's a very simple brand. It's just a circle with the word Currys in it. But I'm pretty sure it's exactly the same colour, purple, that the airline Flybe used to use in the past. So, I mean, it certainly stands out. So again, a watching brief there, Pascal. So, as always, some incredibly interesting news items, some of which we just don't know where things are going to go because the world is still in such a place where we just don't know what the future holds. So shall we move on and focus on things in a little bit more detail and move on to the content spotlights round? In this part of the show, Pascal and I bring to the table a piece of content. It could be an article, podcast, video, anything at all, to be perfectly honest. The big thing is, though, that we never tell each other in advance what that piece of content is, so it always ends up being a surprise. So, Pascal, surprise me.
I don't think I'm going to surprise you a lot, Mr. Roger Edwards, because this is about something we mentioned twice in the news segment, which is the Google I/O 2021 conference. It started yesterday, so yes, hot off the press or hot off the audio waves. I want to give you a quick summary to you and the viewers and listeners of the keynote address from the CEO Sundar Pichai and the different product managers of the Google family. Now, this is a 3-day conference. I've been looking forward to attending the seminars, the workshop. They also introduced for the first time this year the Ask Me Anything sessions as well. Now, understandably, this year, this is an online conference. Now, Google I/O started more than 10 years ago now, give or take, as a very simple affair with a handful of developers to get together and share what they understood about how to use the Google API and create products for their clients. And it's grown into this almost kind of 3-day rock concert type event with big stages and so on and so forth. Well, that was until 2020, of course, Roger. Last year, the conference was cancelled, and they've come back this year with, you could call it a hybrid event. So in addition to learning about the plans for the future that Google have, you could also learn about how to create events where there's a combination of video as well as in-person events. So I won't be able to obviously do justice, Roger, to a 2-hour presentation from the different team members, but I want to give you the kind of top level address. But I would encourage you, all of you, if you're serious about online marketing in particular, and Google is by default your technical partner, there is merit in understanding their plans for the future, so you can make obviously plans accordingly. So the mission for Google, Roger, has not changed. This is all about organizing the world's information and answering questions by providing accurate and quality answers to your questions. They believe still to this day that technology can help improve lives. So as well as obviously my interest in sales and marketing, you could argue, Roger, or business management, they do get involved in education. They do get involved in health as well, which is part and parcel of this presentation that opened the 3-day conference. So the big news begins with Google Workspace, the new name, as you know, for Google Suite. It's now going to become, in the autumn, Smart Canvas. This is the ultimate online collaboration tool, according to the presentation, combining the best of everything they've got, Google Docs to Google Meet and AI. In the future, you'll be able to collaborate online with a document that will automatically update itself. Video will be part of the experience, been improved massively using AI. So noise cancellation, better kind of video footage using low light conditions, but also zooming in is part and parcel of the product. But also, which will please you, Roger, AI gets involved if you're using management mumbo jumbo during your project meeting notes. Is that good? So they are promising to be able to work better together wherever. So this is all about online collaboration. Again, there were some demonstrations, but I thought it was just something interesting to see where they're getting, because that's essentially competing against the likes of Microsoft Teams and many others. Of course, search was part of the conference. There was many presentations about it. It's all about removing barriers to accessing knowledge. So they talk a lot about language and context. So to begin with, translation, something they introduced many years ago, is getting better. Image recognition is getting better. Using Google Lens, pointing your mobile phone towards an object, text, or a person to get more information from the web is working better. And as they shown last year, just as a demo, but now it's becoming a default kind of feature on Android phone, live captioning. So if somebody doesn't speak your language, you could get live captioning in their mother tongue, but also someone is hard of hearing, they can see the text in English and the like. So no barriers to accessing the world's information. Understanding, they also can show you a demonstration of, let's say you ask a question, Roger, about a particular subject or a topic. Maybe the best for you to understand it would be to watch an AR element. So you could point your phone towards an object or the floor, and then you could see maybe a demonstration of a movement in sports. You could see how someone could actually pretend to be a teacher, and they could be writing on your wall using AR the answer to this physics problem and so on. So using AR as a new form of learning is important to them. They are also realizing that in the last 12 months, the how-to question is no longer number one search term on Google. Mm-hmm. The number one search term is it true that, and then fill the blank. So people are now fact checking a lot more using Google. So they're introducing a feature called About This Results to show you where Google got the information from, to reassure you that this is obviously a truthful account to your answer to your question. Experience is also very important in search. They gave a demonstration of somebody planning to go and climb Mount Fuji. So normally to this day, when you get, Roger, is a list of websites or a list of web pages to consult, and not in the future. For complex questions, you're going to get AI getting involved. Not only would you get content from the web, but if the content you need is better in a different language to yours, you'll get translation automatically. So for example, we're arguing maybe to climb Mount Fuji, better off learning from the Japanese themselves. You don't read or speak Japanese, no worries, you're going to get a translation of the web pages with the best content. They're also going to give you suggestions using videos, extract, or also audio extract from the web about better kit or better skills to acquire. So AI will also predict what you need to learn, not just what you need to know right now. So it goes on and on. It's really, really quite exciting. The star of the show, because every year, Roger, there is a star, a platform that shines. YouTube was 2016, Google News was 2017, and so on. Google Maps was 2018 as well. This year, Google Shopping was the star of the show. And I won't, again, be able to summarize everything, but they are making shopping available no matter where you are on the Google ecosystem, whether you are on YouTube, whether you are on Google Photos, whether you are on Google Lens, no matter where you are, you'll be able to access shopping. They are opening up the shopping graph to more retailers than ever before, small and large. They are also allowing you to activate what they called personal cart reminders. So for example, if you were to shop regularly online on the कर्ry's website, if you authorize it, Google can track best price for you. So you could, for example, look at your next camera, Roger, but you didn't go ahead today. Well, if you open the track the price feature, then whenever the price goes down or there's a special offer, Google will let you know. And so it goes on, really, to make the use of Google products interesting. They spoke about Google Maps getting better. Privacy and data storage was an issue that they spoke about, and they are announcing the launch of their first quantum AI campus. So they gave a demonstration of a quantum computer. Quite frankly, Roger, I feel like I was back in the 80s looking at the very first computer. It was so exciting. And finally, just to close this very, very short summary of an amazing opening address by the team at Google, they did a demonstration of 3D video meeting. Now, I must confess, when the screen came up and they were showing the 3D video meeting, I thought people were in the same room, just separated by a very strange looking desk. That wasn't the case. A lady was looking at a TV screen, but the depth that they reproduced and the quality of the colors, the skin tone and so on was such that I believed that they were in the same room, and so did the speakers. And they were saying that that improved the quality of engagement and the sense of belonging and being together even more so, because as a opening and closing kind of statement, so in that pitch I did mention that unfortunately, whilst we are all connected by a global event, we are still very, very far apart indeed.
Wow. And that was just the opening address.
That's it. So there's all the seminars to go through after that. Yeah.
Goodness gracious. Well, I mean, the thing is I have actually seen a photograph of that virtual meeting thing.
Have you?
Wow. There's people raving about that today. I've seen it appear quite a lot on both Twitter and LinkedIn, and people who I know who are big into video technology say this is astonishing stuff. I mean, one of the things, Pascal, is I still mainly view Google as a search engine. Possibly that's because apart from the collaboration we do with the show notes for the podcast using Google Docs, I don't use Google Docs. I'm still Microsoft Office based. I still don't think of YouTube as being part of Google, even though of course it is. So this has been a salutary reminder for me as to just how much stuff is going on with Google, and it's much, 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 much more than just a search engine. Interestingly enough, though, the thing that you did say which caught my attention the most was about the search engine element, and that was the thing that people are searching for is it true that? I think that's fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating, because do you know what? I find myself typing that in as well. I mean, I often see people post things on Facebook that are absolute untruths. There's one that goes round from time to time where people are saying that there are actually 5 Fridays in the month ahead, and this only happens like once every 570 years. So it's a really unique event. And all you actually need to do is either Google that or put that text into a website called Snopes, which is a fact-checking website, right. And it'll come back and say, don't be stupid, this happens at least once every year, maybe even more. But so many people just take these things, for granted, that it's, oh my goodness, this only happens once every 500 years. And I think that people are starting now, aren't they, to say, is it true that 5 Fridays only happens in 1 month in 500 years? And of course they'll find out, no, it's much more prevalent than that. So that was what stuck out for me. But wow, what a keynote.
It was just very, very interesting. And once again, just to close on that, if Google is a partner to you, technically, partner, but also as a marketing partner or a e-commerce partner, just be interested once a year. Just give yourself a bit of time to. You could even, Roger, just put the replay on YouTube as a podcast and get on with other things in your day, and just pick out the little nuggets. I go, oh, that's interesting, because if you're forewarned about their plans for the future, you can put things in place. Or in your case, is that true? That could become part of your content marketing strategy moving forward.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
Over to you, Mr. Rogers. I hope I've not taken too much time for this segment.
Over to me. Okay, this is interesting because I'm going to try and segue from what you talked about into what I'm going to talk about, because that search term, is it true that, has an element of compatibility with what I want to talk about. The reason I chose this content spotlight this week is because I'm becoming increasingly frustrated by the amount of lying that politicians do, and the amount of spin that comes out of some organisations. And sometimes that spin just manifests itself as stupid language. I had a bit of a spat with somebody on LinkedIn over the last few days with companies that still use terms like game-changing and revolutionary and world-beating and, unique, very unique, ultra-unique, all of which are just cliched beyond any meaning whatsoever. And I came across this article which says, and the headline is, 20 years ago, Warren Buffett shared a brutal truth that most people have yet to learn. Now, this is in Inc. magazine, and it's by 𝗪𝗏. And it's a very short article, but it takes you back these 10 years, and it's all and it's about something that Warren Buffett said. Every manager, every politician, by connection, anybody who's in a position of either authority or profile should take what he calls the newspaper test. Now, this was 10 years ago, the newspaper test. And he says, basically, I'm actually going to read this out. He says, it's pretty simple. If you're in a position where you're having to make a decision, and that decision could be whether to fire somebody, or whether to buy stock in something, or whether to launch a new product, or maybe to do something a little bit underhand. He says, if your decision or action passes the newspaper test, then you're okay. But if it doesn't, then you shouldn't do it. And literally what he says is, if you made this decision and it appeared in a newspaper written by a journalist who isn't exactly a friendly journalist, would you be able to look your friends and family in the eye going forward? And I've never seen this before, Pascal, but it just really resonated with me. And I'll tell you why. Because for me, something else happened exactly 20 years ago this year, which I think is a nice comparison to this. 20 years ago, I was working for a big insurance company, and that big insurance company turned a claim down for a lady who was very ill with multiple sclerosis. And I had to appear on UK TV to defend why that company had turned the claim down. The problem is, even though I was incredibly well briefed by the company and I even had media training how to handle the interview, I was made to sit on this couch under the spotlight, and I had this almost like fire-breathing TV producer, TV presenter, absolutely roasting me for what this company that I work for had done. And I knew it was wrong. But I was sat there and I was the politician not answering the questions. I've still got this on video. It's not one of my best moments, although I was hailed as a little bit of a hero by the company at the time, because when I got asked a question, I would answer a different one, which is exactly what I hate when politicians do it. Now, as it turned out, of course that company had made a mistake. Of course it should have paid the claim out. And about 3 weeks later, I had to go back on the television because they ran the story when the company eventually did pay the claim.
Oh, God, right.
So not only did I go back on the TV show and have to sit there whilst they replayed the video from 3 weeks previously with me saying, absolutely not, we're never going to pay this, to, oh yes, we are paying it, and I had to come up with some bullshit about how we'd reassessed it and blah de blah de blah. And I decided that day, when I was sat in that TV studio with those spotlights blaring down at me, with that presenter being really horrible to me, I said that from now on, any decision that I make when I'm in a corporate, or maybe it could be any decision really, I'm going to apply what I would call the couch test. And the couch test is, if this decision, can I make this decision and be happy to go and sit on this couch in front of the spotlights and with that TV presenter and feel comfortable with myself? And I have lived by that couch test ever since, and I wrote about the couch test in my book Cats, Mats and Marketing Plans, and that's why I picked this little article about Warren Buffett's newspaper test today, because I've never come across that before, but it's as close to, as possible to my own couch test as it's possible to be. And I would really like everybody who listens to this show, if you haven't done the newspaper test, or if you haven't got your equivalent of the newspaper test, maybe it's something to think about. You could have your own couch test or your own newspaper test.
Do you know what's interesting? I do now believe that you and I, through the in the news in particular and content spotlights, we are more and more now the mirror of the mood out there. I'm sensing that people are just calling it out more now, but also, you know, this silent majority of people who have been behaving honestly and ethically forever. And I've seen how their chosen profession, their occupation has been hijacked by liars and hackers. It is time to defend it more. And I wonder whether that's, you know, the reason why this article caught your attention, but also it's kind of, you know, mirroring. Do you remember when I talked about Bob Hoffman talking about, you know, the weasels, you know, tech weasels? And I think that rightly so, we should be defending, of course, the very good practices out there done by the vast majority. But unfortunately, what's coming through on sometime, you know, let's be fair, what is mostly visible are usually those who have managed to fabricate or embellish the truth a little. From, you know, your world-beating or, you know, world-class solution, all the way to telling half a lie and half a truth in the same sentence, and hoping that in a way people will forget about it. The difficulties, I mean, that was 20 years ago. For me, nowadays, everything stays online. Everything you say, write and do sticks around. And I'm very perplexed, like you, why politicians continue to behave the way they are, because the ability to keep track of what they've said and how they behave, for this to then be shown to them, is even more readily available than ever before. And yet that behavior just continues.
Absolutely right. And I still say to people, the couch test is my marketing conscience. And I hope you're right. I hope we're seeing a sea change now, that going forward, more people will show that they have that conscience and they have that integrity, and we'll start to see some of these downright lies, but also some of this embellishment washed away. So Pascal, shall we move on? The next segment is always a good one. Marketing, tech and apps. In this part of the show, Pascal and I bring to the table technology, apps, all of which are designed to make our lives as marketers easier. So Pascal, what have you got for me this week?
So I want to go back to audio production and audio editing, if you don't mind, Roger, because I was contacted recently by two web-based solutions who have made big improvements on their services. Some of them have been mentioned in the past. The first one is Podcastle.ai. Now, some of our viewers and listeners may remember this is, at the time when it was introduced to all of us, it was a Chrome ad, or I think they have a different name, Chrome extension, there's a term, which could essentially read text back to you. So it was a text-to-voice conversion. So if you had a long article, but you wanted to multitask, you could essentially use Podcastle.ai to read the text back to you. And it was a fun addition to, you know, what we knew about using Chrome as a browser. A year later, they've become a fully fledged audio production machine, and they are offering some lovely services. So to begin with, they have a very easy to use podcast editor. So if you have recorded some audio, whether using Zoom, Audacity, or any other platforms, you can use a lovely visually kind of WYSIWYG editor for your editing, which I think is a lovely little touch. You can also do your own text to voice podcast creator. So maybe, Roger, you have written an article, but you don't feel like being the one to read it out and you don't want your voice to be on the podcast. That's an option. Then you can use Podcastle.ai to translate it and create a podcast for people to listen to. They are also, of course, offering what they called a solo audio recorder. So using very much the Chrome browser extension, you can record your own voice. And then they have something called Magic Dust. And this essentially using AI to pretty much tidy up your audio, clear the noise in the background, kind of improve, the sound of your voice from the trebles and the bass, do all sort of equalizing and leveling that, it should be of no interest to you as a content creator. And voila, they create an audio you can then use in different ways. So just lovely to have someone that started life as a simple Chrome extension is now become a proper SaaS company. So that's lovely. So that's Podcastle.ai. If you know your stuff and your way around audio editing, you might want something a bit more advanced. And I was reminded by, again, a newsletter. So they do work sometime. I know that you and I sometimes can be a little critical of email marketing done wrong, but when it's done right, it's lovely. So I want to remind you of a company called 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏, spelled 𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 Roger, between automatic and phonics. So this is using AI and a lot of presets where you can upload your audio content, and then you have a plethora of kind of bells and whistles and buttons and radio dials to really vastly improve your audio. They show you a test on the website where literally you have an audio that would come maybe from a Zoom call. By the time it goes through the Auphonics machine, it sounds like a radio show. It's really quite impressive. And they really promote themselves for the pro users, but they have a lovely free to low level entry feature. So again, Roger, if you want something a bit more advanced, then Podcastle.ai Auphonic, I think, is a wonderful addition to your content toolkit.
I do like it when now that we've been doing the show for so long, we're coming up to a year of Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast. I think it is actually quite nice to go back to some of the technology we reviewed early on in the show and see how it's been developed. And, every year we expect a new iPhone, we expect a new Android, we expect a new this, that, and the other. But of course, it's going to be happening to all the apps and all the technology that we use. So I really do like the fact that you've brought a few of these past pieces of tech out and effectively given them the spotlight again to see how they've developed in such a short time.
So what about you, Roger? What have you got for us today?
Well, Pascal, I have recently been told that I will be going to an in-person meeting in London in September. Now, quite a lot of my London meetings, which I always used to get up at the crack of dawn, fly down to London, etc., obviously stopped when the pandemic came. And fortunately for my bank balance and my clients' bank balances, most of those events and meetings, or especially meetings, will probably carry on going over Zoom, because we've all realised that actually we don't really need to be in the same room and incur the cost of flights and maybe accommodation and that sort of thing. But of course, sometimes it will be inevitable that face-to-face is going to be best. And when this invitation came, I realised that the event started quite early in the morning, and it'll therefore require me going down to London, which will be a novelty, and secondly, probably having to go down the night before and staying in a hotel. So what it did is it resurrected my interest in travel apps. And I have been booking my own accommodation for my travels for years and years and years, so I think I'm pretty good at it. So the first thing I did was went back to my favourite, which is booking.com. And it's funny, it's a bit like what you've been saying about the two pieces of tech you've just reviewed here, how things change. And I haven't looked at booking.com for about a year.
Easier.
And they have made some vast improvements to the way it's set out and everything. The search functionality is great. And now, of course, they've got, not only have they got hotels, but they've got a greater integration of, I guess, their equivalent of Airbnb. So you can actually buy rooms in people's houses or buy apartments and that sort of thing. So I noticed that was quite an interesting advance even straight away. But then I came across this other app, which I think going forward I might start using side by side with Booking.com. It's called Hotel Tonight. Now, this is quite interesting in that what they do is they look at hotels which have got excess rooms almost up until the last minute. So we're talking about probably no more than 5 days before the trip that you're about to take. And what they'll do is they've got some sort of algorithm that sees what excess capacity hotels have got, that they're desperate to get rid of those rooms even for a cheap price so that they can fill the hotel. And the closer you get to the booking date, obviously, the better deal you'll get. And Hotel Tonight's got a lovely interface. It's really quite slick. You can select things like luxe hotels and basic hotels, and I like the way it's set out. And they've also got this innovative feature where they'll give you an absolute rock bottom price for a hotel, but they won't tell you the name of the hotel until after you've booked it. Although they will tell you where it is and they'll give you a description of it. So if you're very clever, you can read the description on Hotel Tonight and compare it to the description on Booking.com, because you'll have looked at the map and seen where it is and think, yeah, that's the Ritz-Carlton, or that's the Four Seasons, or whatever it might, or more like the Premier Inn in my case, but you know what I mean. And the closer you get it, the cheaper it is. Now, I did wonder, at the moment, the majority of hotels in London are probably empty or not even open. So whether Hotel Tonight actually works at the moment in the way it's meant to, in that the excess capacity is just the whole of their capacity. But I think what I will probably do going forward, because one of the things that I've noticed when I looked at Booking.com now is pretty much every single hotel has an option where you can book a fully refundable room.
Right.
Whereas before the pandemic, yes, you could get a fully refundable room, but it usually cost a lot more than the non-refundable one. Now it looks to me as if they're all refundable. So what you could do is you could book your hotel on Booking.com in advance to make sure that you've got somewhere to stay, but then in the 4-5 days before your trip, go on to Hotel Tonight, click in the same postcode, see what they've got, and obviously if you can make a saving, book it with Hotel Tonight and cancel your cancelable hotel with Booking.com. Now, I'm sure Booking.com won't be happy with this sort of advice, but hey, it's a good way of saving a few bob for our businesses. So yeah, Booking.com, we all know that. Hotel Tonight, hopefully that's something new that people haven't heard of.
Smashing, and a very, very smart, crafty solution. Thank you very much.
So, Pascal, it's time, as always, after marketing tech and apps, to get really heavy with the tech. Switch on the TARDIS, fire up the flux capacitor, set the controls for the heart of infinity. Let's head back in time, Pascal. It's time for This Week in History.
And in 1897, the first copies of the classic vampire story Dracula by Irish writer Bram Stoker appear in London bookshops.
In 1908, the first major Middle East oil strike was made at Mashhad al-Sulayman in Persia, which I think is Iran. Oh no, it's Iraq. No, Persia's Iran, isn't it? A gusher of petroleum rose 50 feet above the top of the drilling rig and smothered the drillers.
Wow, in 1931, a microfilm camera is patented by New York City banker George L. McCarthy, designed to make permanent film copies of all bank records to deter fraud.
In 1961, in a speech before Congress, US President John F. Kennedy committed the United States to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And of course, the goal was achieved with Apollo 11 in 1969.
In 1977, Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, directed by George Lucas and starring Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford, is first released.
And 2 years later, in 1979, Alien, directed by Ridley Scott, starring Sigourney Weaver, premieres at the 4th Seattle International Film Festival, presented in 70mm at midnight.
In 1995, realizing his company had missed the boat in estimating the impact and popularity of the internet, Microsoft CEO Bill Gates issued a memo entitled The Internet Tidal Wave, which signaled the company's focus on the global network.
In 2017, Wonder Woman, directed by Patty Jenkins, starring Gal Gadot and Chris Pine, premieres in Los Angeles, the first superhero movie to be directed by a woman.
That's terrible.
I'm surprised by that. You know, I would have said earlier than that, way earlier than that. It just goes to show, doesn't it?
It does. Well, you know, I mentioned this week in history that 2001 was the Hurt Locker. Yeah. Catherine Bigelow, the first female director to win an Oscar. Again, such a long way to go, this industry.
I know, and that's less than 20 years ago. Watched Hurt Locker a few nights ago. What a film that is. Incredible film. But yeah, the industry still has a lot to... Now, we've got a lot of films going on here today. We probably shouldn't talk about Star Wars because we've talked about it so much. But Alien, such a different sort of film. Sci-fi, obviously, but horror. And again, some incredible iconic moments, like the baby alien bursting out of John Hurt's stomach, and you know the creeping around in the shadows and the aliens stalking them. And of course, it set the pace like Star Wars did for another series of sequels coming forward.
To me, it's one of those movies again where everything is worked. From the music to the sets using the H.R. Giger, obviously art form, the cinematography, but of course Ridley Scott knew what he was doing with the music, with the design. I've got, for my birthday in 2019, I was given the 40th anniversary book looking back at Alien. And it's a massive, massive book. I mean, literally, you don't want to drop it on your foot. And it's just remarkable. It's a story of grit, determination to make the movie happen, very much like Star Wars. And for me, I must realize that to present this in 70mm was a big deal because movies were not presented in that fashion. So I think for the audience, it must have been quite an experience. I've got a feeling that this will make film marketing at some stage.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Such a good film. Such a good film. And again, very, very quotable. Obviously, JFK, that was one of the defining moments of his presidency, saying that the United States will achieve this goal. I think that is one of the greatest examples of how important goal setting is. And we've said before on the show how often companies don't set goals, even for things like revenue and customers. And setting goals is so important because it gives people a focus.
The reference, we're going back and forth there on this timeline, but going back to Bill Gates and his memo. Now, you can find a copy of the fax, because that was what people were using then. It's a 3-page fax to his managers, and it's really worthwhile reading. I think it's of its time in terms of the tone and the structure, but it was speaking the truth in terms of what was coming around the corner. And of course, as a leader, as a visionary, he was doing his job. I mean, it's become stuff of urban legend where allegedly he was typing in the back of his car because he just realized that they were missing out on something huge. And that completely changed the direction of travel, but also in terms of design and production for the Microsoft products once they understood that they had to find a way to link with the internet.
Yeah, I think I haven't read the copy that you've talked about there. I just read this headline and obviously knew about the internet tidal wave itself. But I hadn't realised that somebody who was so pivotal to early technology, the development of computers, the development of Windows, could have missed the boat in such a spectacular fashion.
I think it's a lesson for all of us because what was happening, they were busy building stuff. Making stuff, and you get drawn into, what's the expression again? Working in the business, not on the business.
Yes.
And I think, but good mark of a leader, you just walk up very quickly and manage to react accordingly. And then for me, I was very surprised by the date for Dracula, 1897. For some reason, I thought it was much earlier than that, because to me, it feels like the the vampire as a creature of legend has been around, particularly Western, but also Eastern European kind of culture for a very long time. But yeah, 1897, it feels quite recent somehow.
Yeah, although there are all sorts of Romanian legends, Transylvanian legends associated with Vlad the Impaler, aren't they? Vlad Dracul, I think his name was. So that's presumably where Bram Stoker got his inspiration for. But it's an interesting book. Obviously, it fueled the production of so many different versions of the film. You had the Hammer horror version in the 1960s, you had the more up-to-date versions we've seen on TV recently, and all sorts of different vampire type franchises. The book, when I read it, I thought the first chapters set actually in Transylvania itself were really scary. I thought, wow, this is a great book. And then once the action shifted towards the United Kingdom, to England, I thought the book became a bit less impressive. So it's worth reading just for the effect that it's had on our films and our TV and on our literature, but it's definitely not the best horror books that there are.
I wonder if there was anything written before that using the blood-sucking creature as a threat. I must look it up. I'm just curious because it's just, as you can tell, it troubled me that it was 1897. I would have put it at least a century or two before, only because of, you're right, the legacy is left. I mean, it's been a while since I saw 𝗧𝗵𝗲, but I saw it when I was younger, and it scared me a lot, even though it was one of those black and white silent movie, but I think it was the music and the way they use the light and shadows.
Yeah, I don't know whether 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was based upon the Dracula book or whether that was based on something else. Something that we should look up. And again, one of the Dracula films may find its way into film marketing at some point.
For sure.
Okay. Pascal, shall we shine the spotlight on some individuals now? Shall we move on to creator shout-outs? So in this section of the show, we give a shout out to some of our favourite creators. And those creators are usually within our immediate networks, sometimes just a little bit outside, but always worth a look. So Pascal, who have you got this week for us?
So this week, I should maybe almost start with an apology because I can't believe I've never included this person as part of this shout out. I simply forgot. But here's the thing, Roger. I listen to his podcast almost every day, and I've been doing so for nearly a year and a half, 2 years now. But it's like sometimes you get into this habit, and it's not until you sit down and go, I must find somebody for the creators shout-outs, and you've got your phone next to you, and it says to you, oh, by the way, the new episode of Today in Digital Marketing has arrived. You realize, oh my God, how is it that after all this time of talking to Roger and to his own listeners, I've never thought of mentioning 𝗏𝗏𝗲. Now, 𝗏𝗏𝗲 is the host of this podcast I mentioned a moment ago, Today in Digital Marketing. He's also the founder of EngageQ, a social media management company in the US. And I discovered him, I don't remember how actually, but I would say it was probably a recommendation from somebody when I was looking at different formats of podcasting as part of a workshop. And I'm going to say it's Colin Gray who introduced me to 𝗏𝗏𝗲. And what Todd does every single day, Roger, which is quite something, he'll produce a solo recording, 5-10 minutes with some lovely audio branding of news summary, quite fast paced with some commentaries, with some thoughts and some questions to the audience. And it's available now also as an e-newsletter format if you don't like to listen to the podcast. But he's also started a chat on Discord and the likes. And I think, Todd should let us know, but it started really as an idea, something they would like to do because he has some background in radio and audio production. But it's really become something that now I simply could not do without. So, and it's one of those things, when you look forward to the next episode, and if it's slightly delayed or whichever. So he also does a special. So I thought we'd quickly let you know, because I've got the app open as we're talking to each other, some of the titles that he'll talk about. So he'll talk about Facebook bets big on e-commerce integrating live shows. Will the rise of the CCO kill the digital agency? Then he has a weekend surprise. why best time to post studies are nonsense you should ignore, while Google search doesn't like large hero images. So it's got some attention-grabbing kind of titles. But then if I click on the one that I'm about to listen today, he's going to talk about TikTok, of course. He's going to talk about Pinterest. He's going to talk about branding, video. He's going to talk about SEO, all that, all those news kind of compact into a 5 to 10 minute kind of solo recording. And so, yeah, I think it's amazing, but I'm just perplexed as to why I never thought of including Todd into the creator shoutouts until today.
I'm pretty sure that when we were thinking of, over a year ago now about this show and putting together this show, you quoted him to me.
Did
as
I?
an
Wow.
I'm sure you did say we should do a news segment. And this Todd guy does this sort of really fast format. I'm pretty sure that in the news on Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast is based upon Todd's work. So fantastic.
There you go.
And
double shout
sorry
out.
it's taken us so long.
So thank you, Todd, and you well-deserved longer video shout-outs.
So this week, I'm going to talk about a gentleman who probably is behind the scenes and probably doesn't get a shout out when he deserves one. You may have heard of a company called #Events. Now, #Events put on these events all over the UK, which I would describe as not so much conferences, but more like expos. So there are workshops there are speeches there, and I've given many speeches at many #events. But they also have exhibitor space for companies to put a stand up, bring some of their people along and to talk to potential customers. And they'll also have product demonstrations and things like that as well. And they're the sort of event that you will also have a networking part of it as well, where you can go along and have coffee and meet people. And they usually take place in football stadiums or that sort of venue. Now, of course, they were utterly devastated by the coronavirus. In fact, I was due to speak at a number of these events in 2020, all around the country, and of course they got cancelled. The guy behind #Events is called Andrew Charlton, and he has successfully reinvigorated the #Events into virtual form. Now, I know that a lot of companies have had to do that, and you and I have been involved in companies that have had to do that, but he's used some of the technology that we've been talking about on the show, like Eventi and Balloon, which are online event software packages, and he's reinvented those shows, those expos, in a virtual environment. And in fairness, it's remarkably good. And I'm sure that going forward, he's going to be in that position where he's thinking, I'm probably going to have to continue with some sort of combination of getting back to the in-person version and also tailoring my offer to that online audience that I've also built during the pandemic. But Andrew's one of these guys who, he's very encouraging, he gets on with it, his organisation is pretty amazing, but he's always there running around in the background making sure that all the plates are spinning, and I don't think he gets the shout out that he deserves, so I'm giving him that shout out today. He's also, just as a little aside, a bit of a train geek as well. And whilst this doesn't happen on LinkedIn, where he posts, obviously, information about his events, sometimes on his Facebook post, he'll be out with the kids and there's a railway line near their home, and they'll be stood by the railway line watching the trains go past. And just as a little shout out is that over the last weekend, they were watching the trains and they were taking video of these Trans-Pennine Express Class 800s going past, and then there was a LNER Azuma going past now, and I just love that sort of thing. So, Andrew, thanks for the #Events, and also thanks for the train videos.
Smashing, wonderful selection again today, Roger.
Okay, Pascal, best part of the show, and this is absolutely the most important part of the show today, because in this segment, we are going to answer the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. Let's move on to film marketing. Space is big, really big. You just wouldn't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. I mean, you might think it's a long way down the street to the chemist, but that's just peanuts to space. Listen. That is one of the introductory paragraphs to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Now, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was originally a radio show back in the late 1970s, early 1980s. It then went on to become a series of books. It went on to become a series of LP records. It became a stage play. It became a box set of CDs of the original radio show. And finally, in 2004, it became a film. Now, I personally have absolutely loved all the iterations of Hitchhiker's Guide for nearly 3 decades. But Pascal, you've only recently watched this film for the first time. So what do you think?
What did I think of the film? I thought this was, someone entering, a crazy man's mind and trying to make sense of all of this. But I think, frankly, it's a delightful experience to watch the film for the first time, because then you've got to seek out more information about the author of the book, about the producers. You want to understand more about the vision and some of the key messages. So it's a film that, although it's only been a few days for me, it's going to stay with me for quite some time, Roger. But I'm also very aware of its incredible heritage. But it's also, for me, what we're going to call very British, but in a very good way. Only a British author and only a British casting crew production team could pull this off.
Absolutely. And I mean, when you trace it right back to the radio show, the idea of the book being like an electronic gizmo, I mean, in fact, I mean, Douglas Adams was prophesizing the future with this. The original idea for the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was almost like a tablet device you type questions into and it would give you answers. And he'd type in a question like, what is the Earth? And it would go da 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 da, and then the voice would reply in spoken word. And of course that worked perfectly on the radio. But then when they went on to make a TV series, they actually animated the book bits. And of course, everybody said, no, you can't just have a bloke reading a book for 15 minutes on TV. But on the TV, they incredibly animated each of the book segments. Now, in the film, for necessity, they had to trim them down significantly. But even in the film, they still retain the bits of the book, reading out bits about ravenous bug-bladder beasts of Thrall and Vogons and things like that. It's a remarkable heritage. And you could almost say that the film is the culmination of 30 years of different iterations of the source material.
And what is interesting is, for me, so all this was happening in the UK, and obviously in France we didn't have it, or certainly I missed it completely. The only time I was aware of its existence was during a school trip in the 80s, where I was well into role-playing games. So I was going from store to store looking for Dungeons and Dragons and other form of RPG items. And in the stores you could buy a role-playing game version of Doctor Who and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But to me, they were like foreign, and I didn't understand any of it. In fact, I thought Doctor Who was a question I was being asked. I was too much into my Dungeons and Dragons and Lord of the Rings type scenario. But so I was aware of it, but never consumed any content. I was aware of the fandom behind it. So suddenly when the movie came out and when I saw the trailer, I remember thinking, wow, this I must see. There was elements, and again, I think it's meant with great affection, elements of the Monty Python in there for me. There was elements of the wit of the written word from English authors that you don't find in your other nations, but also the completely kind of zany. I mean, some of the world, some of the creatures, some of the characters. So in this movie, we have Sam Rockwell playing 𝗧𝗵𝗲, which to me, back to what I was saying a moment ago, sounds like a very badly thought D&D character that you came up with very, very quickly. And the manner in which, within this kind of crazy universe, you have clear messages of issues that were important to Adam Douglas, which is around the environment and conservation, around technology, and ultimately the kind of consequences of having too much power, too much bureaucracy, and of course religion. So it's all in there in 2 hours.
And of course, the whole premise of the film, and this was the premise of the first of the series, was this quest for the ultimate answer to life, the universe, and everything. And there can't be any of us who haven't at one point just sat back and thought, just what is it all about? And of course, what they're saying is that in the massively dim and distant past, people built a computer called Deep Thought and asked that computer to tell them what the answer was to life, the universe, and everything. And of course, the computer says it can do this, but it's going to take 7.5 million years to run the program. And of course, these people are extremely disappointed. They're going to have to wait that long to find out the answer. And then they skip forward in time, and Deep Thought reveals the answer to the question. And of course, the answer is 42. And you've got that sort of crescendo build up to this, and they go, what, 42? 7.5 million years? And that's what we've waited for. And then, of course, the next stage is they've got to build an even bigger computer to actually work out what the actual question was to which the answer was. I mean, it's all complete nonsense, isn't it? But it has that link to reality that, however absurd, you can think, I do want to know what the answer to everything is. And I think that what Douglas Adams achieved with this is writing utter farce and utter fiction, but making it just slightly believable. I mean, the way he describes things like the infinite improbability drive. The infinite improbability drive is a fabulous new way of crossing interstellar distances without all that tedious mucking about in hyperspace. He writes it with such technical authority that you could almost believe that it was technically possible what he's actually saying, which is absurd, but his writing was just incredible. And of course, they've turned that into visuals in the film.
It's true satire like they used to do a few centuries ago. You think about some of the plays of Shakespeare, if you think some of the cartoons, some of the newspapers, being critical of authority figures, but not really revealing who they were talking about. That's really what this movie reminds me of. And there's some real moment where you laugh a lot at the absurdity, and someone should go, that's really clever. And then other times you kind of go, that's a bit scary, because we are either in the middle of it, in the case of animal species who are disappearing, the same way the dolphins go, and I'll let you explain that bit in a moment, all the way to the way in which bureaucracy has taken over reason in some part of the world and in some sectors.
Yeah, and the bit about the dolphins, I think this is probably one I can't remember, but it says it is of course, a fact that not many people realise is that man is in fact only the third most intelligent species on the planet Earth. And then it goes on to say that the dolphins are the second ones, and the dolphins actually managed to get fed up with human beings and decided to leave, and they said something like, so long and thanks for all the fish. Yeah. But of course that means that there is still the reveal as to who the most intelligent life forms on the planet are. And I'll leave that one to people who haven't watched the film or read the books or seen the play or listened to the music or whatever it might be. I mean, what I would hope is that if somebody watches this film, it would give them the incentive to go back and immerse themselves in some of the earlier stuff. I have to say, because I grew up with it all, I did find the film a little bit disappointing, possibly because they just had to leave so much out of it. But that's testament to their ability to edit it down into a cohesive unit in an hour and a half, whatever it was. But hopefully it provides a teaser for people to get into the work as a whole.
I think also for me, it felt like the movie was dealt with great. They were very cautious about it in terms of being very respectful of the work of Douglas Adams. There was a lot of his personal friends. So we know that the guy, the voice, is Stephen Fry, who was a personal friend of Douglas Adams. There was also the thing going on. And of course, sadly, Douglas Adams passed away in 2001, so never saw this film. So I think there was a lot of dimensions, which meant that I think the film producers felt perhaps they were treading on eggshells, and there was an enormous following. So it's a bit like now making a Star Wars movie. It must have been easier to do it in the 70s than it is to make a Star Wars movie in 2020 onwards. So for me, my reaction was, having seen the film, I now look forward to reading the book, because I haven't. As I've explained, this was something that I missed completely, because I think the way in which she's chosen the words, the way in which the sentences are constructed for this kind of satire, I think the reading format is going to be thoroughly enjoyable in my view. And to me, the film gives me almost like the taster of getting into Douglas Adams' genius, really.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And there are some, again, for us geeks, in the film, there's a character called Marvin, the paranoid android. I think you ought to know I'm feeling very depressed. And obviously the robot is very sleek. It's sort of a circular robot with very, very modern looking. And there is one scene in the film set towards the end. If you actually look in the background of the scene, you can actually see the original Marvin, the paranoid android from the TV series, standing in the back of the scene. And I just loved that bit, because everybody in the cinema who has seen the original TV series simultaneously, oh, look, it's the original Marvin that stood there in the background. And that's when you know it's a true geeks film, when people can spot things like that.
No, absolutely. So what do you think about marketing such a film, which has already decades of history, of support from fans of all ages and genders and so on? It must have been quite tricky, but they went ahead with a trailer that was in line with the movie. It featured the voice of Stephen Fry as the guide, and almost kind of giving an account that would both be appealing to those who knew the universe created by Douglas Adams, but also people like me who were new to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you almost don't know where to begin, because, as you say, you could almost argue that all the previous iterations of the film, book, TV, record, whatever, were all effectively helping to market the film. But that could also have been its Achilles heel, as you said, because the expectations were set so high. So maybe the marketing was a little bit low key because they were scared to raise expectations too high.
So the trailer was released, and we know that it was well received. In fact, back in 2005, it won an award for the Golden Trailer award, which is a ceremony that takes place just to look at the marketing of films, and it got the category of most original, which I think is in line with the film. It's quite an original film after all.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I mean, it's almost hard to categorize. I mean, obviously it's science fiction, but it's just a very, very unique form of science fiction.
So then Stephen Fry again kept busy, because with regard to the film being promoted, they were looking at clever ways to attract the attention of the audience. So Stephen Fry recording what they called additional guide entries that were released back then on iTunes.
Yeah, I mean, that was absolutely genius, doing that, because again, his voice is so iconic. The original voice of the book was a guy called Peter Jones, going way back, and the voices are uncannily different. Right. Uncannily similar. Sorry, I should have said uncannily similar. And in fact, there's an absolutely joyous bit, I think, in the radio show. They did some updated versions of the fourth and fifth books. They actually did some radio show versions of them about 20 years after the original set, when the original book or reader had died. And they did this remarkable introduction where they segued the two voices together, almost to make it like a glitchy thing. And I just loved the way that they did that. But yeah, and they released the soundtrack as well.
Now that's interesting, because all the songs, but the soundtrack came out almost 2 weeks before the film came out. So again, another way to look after the fans. All songs, including actually the recording of the guy I just mentioned a moment ago with Stephen Fry, so people could enjoy different versions of So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. And Marvin, with his kind of doer statements, had his own remix as well.
Absolutely, yeah. The Marvin mix has always made me laugh. So it was released on the 28th of April 2005 in the UK, a day later in the US. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that I liked as well was the DVD when it came out. I mean, the whole DVD could have been what you get on the screen, could have been the original idea for what the guide was like, is a video book, the ability to choose what you want to watch, the questions you want to answer. But they kept that quirkiness within the DVD setup, didn't they, with the deleted scenes and the really deleted scenes. And you could even sing along to the songs as well. Absolutely love the way they carried it through.
I think for me, it's part of its charm and appeal. So not only do we have, the experience of, I'm going to listen to Stephen Fry, I'm going to listen to the guys, I'm going to listen to the track music, then I'm going to see the movie. Then within a matter of a few months, they didn't wait long for the DVD, which I think is a plus, really. Back in the days when you had to wait an entire year. Do you remember those days, Roger?
Yeah.
Now, I think from April, so that was released in September, there's not a lot that goes by. But then you have more. You have audio commentaries, of course. You even have a game where you can play Hangman against Marvin. And of course, a documentary about how they made the film called Don't Crash, which is obviously another nod to some of the key events in the film. And to me, that's what you do. So you create an experience around the core product. So we have a film, which I know is the result of decades of effort in different format, but there's a wraparound which is kind of multimedia. You've got obviously the music, you've got this, you've got the other. Another one that they did was Douglas Adams was actually the producer of the role-playing game, which was back in the 80s, a text-only game. You remember those days where you had to say go north or pick axe and kill monster? Well, he had done a version obviously based on his book, and to celebrate again the release of the film, BBC Radio 4 website had the game available for free to play for a while.
And that game is incredibly hard.
It's
incredibly hard. I mean, you actually do have to know the story of the book in order to play the game, because if you have never read the book, you will have absolutely no chance. You won't even get beyond the first few lines, because it sticks to the narrative of the book so utterly carefully, but it's extremely challenging. Yeah, this was a difficult one to talk about, because you and I have come at it from different approaches. I have this 30 years of, I was obsessed with the Hitchhiker's Guide when I was at school. I used to have the words "Don't Panic" written on the front of my exercise books. And as I say, I can recite so many of the passages, even now, without having to read them. I've got them in my head. And as I say, I used to drive my son mad by doing so.
It's fascinating culturally, because I spent the 80s and just enough of the 90s in France before I came to the UK. I came to the UK in 91. So there's some elements where I've missed it completely. But if you think about what your culture, and by extension the TV and movie industry have gifted the world, you've got Doctor Who, you've got obviously this one here with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you've got people like Quatermass and all those. But it seems to always be linked to technology. Yeah, and the environment. If you think about it, there's always that kind of duality, which I think is fascinating to observe. I mean, just because of my research, we know that obviously Stephen Fry was a good friend of Douglas Adams. Now, Stephen Fry is also tech savvy. He's interested in what you can do with it. Now, Douglas Adams was the first owner of the brand new Mac computer. Stephen Fry was the second.
No.
And I'm sure he didn't let him forget about it.
Fantastic. Pascal, we could go on talking. We could go beyond the film, or we could start talking about the next part of the story, about the restaurants at the end of the universe. If you've done 6 impossible things before breakfast today, why not round it off with breakfast at Millyway's, the restaurant at the end of the universe? You see, I can remember all of these bloody quotes. It's really embarrassing. But I think we are going to have to draw a line under our discussion of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy today. Pascal, thank you as always for being such a good conversationalist in our joint geekdom. And thank you to everyone who's watched the show today and everybody who has listened to the podcast version of the show. Please give us your feedback. Leave comments either on the YouTube channel or just get in touch with us on Twitter or LinkedIn. Let us know what you think. Until the next episode, get out there and make sure that your marketing is done right. I was Roger Edwards and he was Pascal Fintoni.